Well, we're going to start out with back in 2004, one memorable day when the Horton Quadruplets were born. Believe it or not, they're 17 years old. Hard to believe. Imagine having 4 going to college. Now, I invited them here tonight, but you know, they probably got sports and homework and you name it. So, and the names, Reverend Tyler, Trent, and Kaylee. That put us on the map. There they are. Now that wasn't when they were, and as you see, there's 5 because there was one born. Another one born later on. One of one, we call her, the youngest. So I'm disappointed they couldn't come. And here they are today. All doing well in school, sports, studies. 2 of them are looking at colleges. And the only known quadruplets in Wayne County. And what do they say? Only 2,358 sets of quadruplets in the entire world. Now, I'm going to talk about some of our famous authors. Not too well known. It was hard to find information on this Florence Cronice. But she was famous for her books on folklore. And but she traveled all over the world and was always learning. There was a Cronice family in Newark, of course, and she was related to them. And that's the kind of a book she would write, because she traveled a lot in Africa. Co-wrote with Henry Ward. Whenever you can Google somebody's name and they're one of our Newark person, that's pretty good. So it makes them worthy of recognition. Now this is Mary Burns Appleman. Look at that dog with a jaw out of whack there. I remember her from growing up. I never knew she was an author. And she lived in ran a rooming house in the corner of West Union and Mason Street. There's a parking lot there now. You're going to hear me say parking lot a lot. But, well, she wrote a book of poems entitled To My Friends, published when she was 81 years old. And I've got the book here. We'll take a look at it after we're done. When she died in 1958, she left her home to St. Michael's Church, and they sold it to Jerry Gavin, who had a store next door, and he ran it as a rooming house. But eventually, did I say she sold it to Jerry? Correct. She willed it to St. Michael's, and St. Michael's sold it to Jerry Gavin. And she talks in her books about local things, poetry the old-fashioned way, not verses that are hard to understand. It actually rhymes. And a lot of local connections here. So take a look at this book when we're done. Now, this is Miriam Buckner Pond, and she wrote a lot about the spiritualist movement and Fox family. In her book, I have one over there as well, called Time is Kind, the story of the unfortunate Fox family. And then she had another bestseller, was called Heaven and a Wildflower. Dr. Jacob Wilson was an early Newark newspaper publisher, and he lived in the house over on North Main that has all that gingerbread on the corner of North Main and the first turn, Bryant Avenue. That was his home, and he was far out. I think he was a bit of a progressive Democrat. And I've had his book somewhere, I couldn't find it. But once again, Google his name, Jacob Wilson, and you will have, he was known all over. Now, this may be our most famous author from Newark, and I don't think I have to tell too many people what he's famous for. We'll do it anyway. He wrote The Lost Weekend. Now, the movie is probably more well known than he was. And out of these 6 books, probably the Secondhand Life on the bottom was the second most well-known. His sister-in-law was Cecilia Jackson, who has written many, many of our local history books that I refer to a lot. And his nephew, Cecilia's son, he also wrote for the Democratic Chronicle. Now, I talk about a train wreck out in East Palmyra. His sister and brother and some other kids were crossing the East Palmyra crossing, and there was a big water tank there that kind of hid their view. They probably did not have automatic gates then. And pulled right in front of the 20th Century Limited. Well, it was such a terrible wreck that the conductor of the train engineer didn't even know he hit anybody until he got to Syracuse. It was a terrible thing. And that happened in 1917. I don't have it on there. And they always thought that maybe this affected Mr. Jackson, who had a lot of issues with alcoholism and so forth. But he sure put us on the map with his Lost Weekend, because it was a lot about himself. A. Park Burgess, 26 years with Park Presbyterian Church, but always was stated supply. In other words, he was not officially appointed as pastor, only as stated supply. That's the way he wanted it for 26 years. he wrote a book called Songs of the Night. I have that over here as well. And dedicated it to his parents, who, once again, here we are, best known for that terrible train accident out in Zurich. But his book has a lot of poetry in it. That train wreck, they never did find out why it went off the tracks. But the stack, the steam car was filled with steam the way the engine turned around and filled the car up with steam and killed many, many people. Terrible way to die. Another one of his books, and he went on to be very famous in the movement against alcohol, temperance. Jesse Cruz, he recently did a program at the library, probably some of you were there, on his book, Live Your Dash. Graduated Nazareth College, pursuing a degree at Colgate. This is his first book, and we wish him all the best. Another one of our well-known authors, and by the way, the grandmother of Jesse Cruz. This is Pearl Rook at her cottage on Crescent Beach. Now you see a little hummingbird feeder up there above her head. That's because every year hummingbirds will build a nest right on that tree. I saw it for myself many times. Pearl wrote poetry. It's kind of far out, for me anyway. Shifting Sands, that was the first one. That was named after her cottage. But more of sonnets, I call them. Different types of poetry. And her husband co-wrote The Sound of Thought with her. Died in 2019, age of 96, and she probably didn't have a lot in common with her grandson except determination. Lotus Bay was her favorite thing in life, and she, up until age 95, she drove her own boat over there. Another local author, Sharon SanAngelo. Talked with Sharon just the other day, and her latest book, Tarnished Secrets. And she calls it a fiction, but it's not, because it was about Anna Laura Reinhardt and her efforts to come to America, what they went through from Croatia. Anna Laura and her husband, I think, were at her book signing. Her other book was A Lightning Within, her first book. And that talked about the experience she had with serious illness and what she went through to try to get the doctors to understand what she was going through. She was seriously ill, but conquered it and decided to write the book to help other people understand what she went through and help them. She also was a retired nurse. Very good writer. Erin Jensen is best known for being a pharmacist at Wegmans. And her books are on display there and for sale right near where you walk into the pharmacy area. And she gave a talk at our library and about her Dreamwater series. I'll be honest with you, I haven't read any of the books. I suffer from a thing called attention deficit, and believe me, it's a serious thing. You find yourself being able to read by holding up a card each sentence at a time. Otherwise, you have a tendency to skip and skim through things. So we're proud of Erin Jensen, who describes herself as a full-time daydreamer. Another author from many, many years ago, Newark High School class of 1930. Lived on Grace Avenue. Her father worked for the old switching building up on the end of Grace Avenue, the long lines repeater station. Looks like a school. And she made it big. My mother knew her and did come back to Newark at times and wrote that book. Now, the house she grew up in was right next to Garden Lane on the corner. A lot of people don't realize Garden Lane, when it was opened up, they bought a house and they moved it down the street to open up Garden Lane. And that's where Steve, Alliance National Bank, lives. All kinds of useless information you get from it. Esben Blackmar, whose name is on one of our streets, assemblyman, merchant, congressman, Now, Chris, did we ever figure out what the correct spelling was of Noel Annals?
I think it's the one L.
Well, we'll have to get a hold of Bob Helsel and tell him that, because in his book.
Good luck.
Anyway, there is a photo of Noah Annals. Well, we couldn't find it for this purpose. So, and what I don't have in that is the fact that he was a member of the Deluge Hose Company of the Newark Fire Department, same as I was. Escaped, traveled the Underground Railroad, and came back from Canada when it was safe. Worked for Joseph Miller. And the house he owned on Black Marsh Street is still there. An honorable man, and the reason says so on his gravestone. Admiral Garris. A lot's been written about him. He was a Newark High School graduate. Best known for saving the ship USS Franklin and many, many lives by getting it back to safety. There were many who said he couldn't do it, that it was going to sink, and he just kept on going and saved a lot of lives. And Newark's, another Newark native, Bill Stewart, Stewart, wrote 2 books that chronicle all his life experiences. Very famous. And Newark High School graduate. The story of the USS Franklin. Now we're getting into sports. Tom Burgess, Newark High School graduate, and what he went on to be in the Canadian Football League, and had a pretty impressive record. Now, he was in my last lecture I did, but he's 50 or 51 years old now, so he's no longer playing football. But what he's doing is he works for an investment firm in Rochester, doing very well. I don't think working in the nursery was his thing. I don't think he enjoyed that.
Yes, he wanted to do that.
Right.
But it didn't. It couldn't pan out anymore because there was too much competition against it.
True. Now this came to me, was made known to me after I did part 1. Mm-hmm. Peter Hannan, who grew up on Elmwood Avenue, another author, and I don't know anything about any of those things he did. Never read any of it, but pretty famous. Brought to my attention, I had no idea. I remember when the Hannans lived on Elmwood, in the ranch house. And I don't think he comes back to Newark very often. Well, our own Doug Kent, elected to the Hall of Fame, and has done very well. Now, I understand his daughter is making a pretty good record for herself in bowling. I was up there the other day with my great-granddaughter, and thank goodness for the bumpers. I told her, I said, just like training wheels, you got to get rid of those bumpers, otherwise you'll never be very good at it. But she's only 8 or 9, so we'll we'll lighten up on her. So Doug's career is really something we should be proud of. And of course they renamed Finch Street Doug Kent Lane. But now he's kind of retired, taking care of his bowling alley and doing a wonderful job. We're lucky to have it. You know, a lot of towns lose their bowling alleys, and we have a great one. And they've worked hard to bring in things that would bring people in there, and parties and so forth for kids, and something going on all the time. Good for them. James Briggs was a lawyer in Newark, and he was instrumental in founding the Lawyers Cooperative Publishing Company. Believe it or not, that was founded in Newark, along with attorney S.K. Williams. Now, Lawyers Cooperative Publishing Company is now owned by another big firm. They sold to Thompson, and Thompson Publishing sold to somebody else. One of the big worldwide news agencies. And this wasn't that long ago. And the Briggs family owned right up until they sold to Thompson. And so many of the Briggs family members got to share in that $800 million. And I remember my great-grandmother was a Briggs. But nobody ever contacted me, so I just backed over. This is Mr. Briggs's residence on West Maple Avenue. And when he moved away, Charles Perkins bought the farm. You can see Wood Hill. And he didn't tear the house down. They cut it in half. One half of the house is 110 Elmwood. I think a Peters lives there. The other half of the house is 502 Pearson Avenue, where Stan Herdman lived. And if you look at those houses and you have a copy of that, when you look at them, you can see, no question about it. Another piece of useless information. The Davis family. Greg, this is Chris's brother, goes to Colorado and makes good, and well, why not? He went to Syracuse University, and very talented. He sold his work all over the world, and something to be proud of. I know Chris is proud of him. I've seen some of his creations. He's very, very talented. He can make models of buildings. Now, Wayne Williams, although he doesn't live in Newark now, he's really close by, but he's ageless. He just keeps going on and on. And teaches at the Arts Center of Newark, Arts Council. That's sculptures and metal, works of metal. Doesn't that look like Lacey Graham?
It's okay. Is it?
Well, I don't know. It looks like her, but I have no idea. Last year, I had another The last time I did this part one, I had another photo of him doing some metal sculpture. Another Syracuse student. But he can do anything. Has anybody seen his creation over in Phelps?
It isn't there.
It's not? Did somebody steal it?
Somebody stole one of the figures over there.
Really?
The one in Canada was still there. The Native American.
That's a terrible photo of Bill Finewood. I apologize. Well, unfortunately, Bill is not going to be a Newark resident very long. His house is for sale, and they're moving to be near some children. And like Chris's brother, very talented in making displays and models. You'll be missed. Paul Swain was a class of 61, my class, and nobody would have believed that he would have ended up being a Catholic priest. First of all, he was a Methodist, brought up as a Methodist. And he was always quiet in school, very good student. Went on to join the Air Force. Who would have thought? You know, he was one, I don't think I have it in there, but he was one of the first male cheerleaders we ever had. So we used to kid him about that, and he got the last laugh. And just never stopped learning and doing things. And then to be appointed the 8th Bishop of Sioux Falls. And of course, he's now retired, traveling. He never comes back that I know of. So he hasn't come to any of our class reunions. Well, we're going to try to get him there, and I had a way of doing it, but they didn't think I should try that. And I remember as a kid, he'd bring his lunch to school, and he always had 2 peanut butter sandwiches. And before he took them out of the bag, he'd sit on the bag. So I said, well, we'll call out there and we'll say, look, if you don't come to our reunion, we'll let everybody know that's what you did. Well, our reunion is our 60th. Imagine that, coming up in September. If that doesn't make you feel old, what do it? And somehow I don't think he's going to show up. He's probably going to be in Africa or someplace, China. Now here we have Sybil Shearer, pioneer in modern dance. She wasn't born in Newark, but grew up and attended Newark High School and graduated also in about 1930. And was pushed by her mother to do well and get into this dancing, and her mother was her biggest fan. Her father was a commercial artist. You know, a lot of, while we're on that subject, a lot of those commercial artists from Newark, and they worked for Bloomers, they're separate, and they went on to do a lot of things with their talent. Oscar Anderson was one. So, Sybil Shearer ended up in Cleveland. Was well known there for teaching modern dance. And I talked with her on the phone one time at my mother's insistence. And she had all good things to say about Newark. We'll come back and do programs at the Capitol Theater. Speaking of commercial artists from Bloomers, there's Owen. And of course, everybody knows what Owen is famous for, his nose art. Owen would do a program at Rotary or Chamber of Commerce, and was very talented. I don't know where Owen is now. He's
Ashton Place.
Ashton Place, all right.
Yeah, he'd be 102.
Oh.
March 31st.
$100 nose arts. Now we're into some sports again. Frankie Gravino, born in Newark, and of course, a lot of Gravinos worked at Bloomer Brothers paper company. And his big claim was the fact he ended up with the Fargo Morehead twins. His home run record. Played for Rochester. Friend of Roger Maris. But I don't think he died in Newark. I think he had moved away. Susan Sessions Zuccotti. Susan grew up on West Motor Street, 507, I think. Now, why do I know all that? Because I had a paper route up and down that street. In fact, I had 2 paper routes, morning and evening. I know all these addresses. We've written books on the Holocaust. Very smart, very smart. My brother's class, 607. Well, I don't even get that right, but. Her father and grandfather and her uncle ran Exit Burgess Company. She was once married to the vice mayor of New York City. And they had a family cottage over in Putneyville. And they still have it, and they're making it into a rental or a B&B or something. I saw something about it. And her sister lives nearby over there, Janie. in Pawneeville. John Daggett from the Daggett family. That's quite a story. John Daggett. I want to talk about his business. David Daggett was his father, right? Chris?
No, that was his brother.
His brother, okay. Daggett's had a machine shop in Newark, right about where St. Michael's is, or on the other corner. And they made cloth carding machines. And that machine shop was known all over for the work they did. Let me look ahead and see if I've got it in the. It's under. So they decided to go west, young man, as they say, and look for gold. Well, they weren't too successful, but they never really ever got out of mining. They were always dabbling in mining. But I want to go back to their machine shop. Good piece of information there, that machine shop in Newark. They employed a lot of young men as apprentices. Now, one was Isaac Singer, who lived in the East Palmyra area, somewhere between Palmyra and Newark. Palmyra claims him, and Arcadia claims him, but we know how famous he was for his sewing machine. Another famous person that worked in the machine shop as an apprentice was what's that? Welsh. Henry Wells. Now, he also lived up towards Palmyra. And, of course, Henry Wells went on to found Wells Fargo, American Express. So we have all these famous people that we can lay claim to. So this John and David Daggett, when they moved to California, John Daggett got himself appointed as superintendent of the United States Mint. Probably a political thing. Well, let's talk about what he did while he was there. Now, it was a pretty powerful position to be superintendent of a mint. And the second part talks about the fact that he had 24 dimes struck called the 1894 S. Barber dime. Struck as a special job for his friends, to give to his friends. I think they'd put him in trouble nowadays. So he gives 3 or 4 to his daughter Hallie, and Hallie spent one of them for ice cream. Well, the dimes today are worth over $1.5 million. Hallie lived till the 1950s, I think. So she was pretty well known on her own. Daggett, California is named for the Daggett family, but they started out in Newark. Here's another family that Newarkans lay claim to. Originally from Marion, Newton Burrud moved to Newark and purchased a house on the corner of West Miller and West Avenue. Now, recently, 2-3 years ago, there was a bad fire there. The barn burned down. Well, it turns out that barn is where Newton Burrud started the mincemeat business. That became Perfection Mincemeat. And that in itself is pretty neat. But his son, who graduated from Newark High School, worked for the newspaper, joined Eastman Kodak, but got interested in photography. Leland Burrud moved to California, making his own business and making pictorials, taking movies all over California, and invited his father, the original Newton Burrud, to come and live with them. Now, Leland, the photographer, he was also very famous in establishing the Hollywood area and was one of the people that had the Hollywood sign put up on the hill. I keep running into all these historical facts. If you want to keep going into the Burrud family, the grandson, Billy Burrud, and you can look this up or you can watch the movie. He, while he never was from Newark, he had a part in the Captain's Courageous and went on to be a producer with projects such as Animal World. And his son now has that business. He's very well known in Hollywood. And I talked to him on the phone once. And he was very interested in knowing about the Burrud family. Another fact about the original Newton Burrud was that he was a cigar maker and very active in early Newark bands. There were a lot of cigar makers in Newark at one time. Styles. Another one. How'd that get in there? Well, looks like I didn't do my homework. Well, that's what we talked about earlier. Don Vanderbrook, born in Marbletown, New York, by Hannan. He's still alive. And like his uncle, Clarence Vanderbrook, graduated from Cornell, worked for nurseries, but he developed a real flair as a floral designer. And his work had been seen in all these publications. And he was asked to go to Washington to do events and parties for a visit by Queen Elizabeth. He was an event planner. So he is Karen Vanderbrook's uncle, or cousin. By the way, Karen is also a graduate of Cornell, as was her father. So this is where I like to end with this little piece about Don Vanderbrook, but I don't know if I can And I lose the whole thing if I'm not careful.
I'm Don Vanderbrook, and haven't really figured out what I do, but basically I'm an event planner, and we set up big events throughout the country. This was originally a dairy farm, 60 acres, and the only thing that was here was the barn and the house. Incidentally, it was built in 1847, and I started working, and after a week or so I determined what the name of the property should be, because working in the soil, it was nothing but clay and stone, so I called the farm Claystone Farm. I wanted to be able to be the florist that had something extra and something different that you couldn't buy at a flower shop. This is a new variety of zinnia that I've grown this year for the first time, and it's called Lollipop, which is kind of an interesting name, but it does have a variety of colors and forms, and makes a great cut flower because it lasts so well in water. I wanted to be more creative. I wanted to be more in tune with developing beauty and plant materials. I studied genetics in college, and I am a hybridizer as well. I hybridize a lot of clivia plants, got some beautiful all different colors, including some yellow ones. This is not something I particularly like to see, and the reason being, it's a fall flowering plant, which means as the summer over, is it beginning to be over? It's an anemone is the name of it, and it bloomed. You can see all the number of flower buds on there. I taught school for up-and-coming florists at Cleveland State for a period of time. I gave them all a $20 bill, and I said, go to a flower shop and buy $20 worth of flowers, and I want you to come back and tell me all about your experience. The reason for that is I wanted them to look at a customer from their own standpoint. What was their reaction to the person that sold them the flowers? Were they allowed to pick out what they wanted? Teach them how to be treated. It's called balloon flower, or platycodon is a common name, but the reason it's called balloon flower is because the buds come out looking like a hot air balloon. Here's a nice grouping of those Gloriosa lilies, or rudbeckia of the cappuccino variety. This is carved out of stone. All of this in here is really quite wonderful piece. Okay. Her name is Popcorn, and I cannot work in the garden but when she's not right underneath me, giving me encouragement to satisfy, to create, and to make people happy because you've embellished their life with beauty. It is one of the most exciting things that you could ever do. This is getting to be a major problem. These are Alberta spruce, and you can't cut them back. So they're beginning to interfere with my passageway through here. But this is what happens when you cut them back. They all lose all their needles. At one time, I would say at least twice a month, I was in Washington to do functions, because we did a lot of work at the National Gallery of Art. And I'd always get the question, why would they bring someone from Cleveland into Washington to do a function? And my pat remark is, I guess they wanted the best.
And so there you have it. If I do a part 3, and you have anybody that you know is famous from Newark, and I can do a little research and include them in part 3, I will. So, there you are. Thank you for coming.